Trust halhal besia lupisin kusqeli betched yetlwa. Kumesia ipres yetlwa. Welcome to Indian time again. First of all, we'll start out with the place names. The two place names we have today, first one is in Jimkhane or in Jimkhanetk. That's for name for Polson. And the explanation or the translation for that is the view that people got a long time ago with the teepee. They think that's the teepees, teepee poles that they viewed from when you come over the hill by Polson and you see the teepees and the body of water in the background, and so that in Jimkhanetk. The other one we're going to talk about is means little point, and that's a little rocky point, and that's just further north of Polson. Those are the two place names that we have today. Over the past Indian time programs, we've talked about many things. We've talked about photo archives, we've talked about the Place Name Project, fires, NAGPRA, People Center, preservation. We've talked about many different things. And today we're going to talk about plants. Plants that are important to us as Indian people and to our ancestors and to our future. We all know that we watch TV, you see all the medicines that are being advertised on TV and the people that are out going in a natural way of getting medicine. So that brings a lot of concern to the tribes throughout the country. So today I have as my guest Joanne Big Crane, who is working for the Preservation Office. Joanne started working for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes over 7 years ago as a plant specialist for the Natural Resource Department Agriculture Program. And she's transferred to the Tribal Preservation Office in 1997 as a tribal ethnobotanist. And that, as you all learned earlier from one of our programs from Marcia Cross, exactly what the preservation role was in the tribal programs. With that, I'd like to introduce Joanne. Joanne is from the one of the original, I guess, home sites or home areas of Pend Oreille people in the area between Ravella and Dixon. And so with that, I want to start and introduce Joanne and ask her, first of all, I guess, exactly what is ethnobotany?
Lemlem Chatwin. An ethnobotanist is a cross between a person who studies botany and anthropology. And botany itself studies plants, and anthropology studies people and cultures. And so the combination between the two, as ethnobotany means the plants that we use as tribal people for food, for shelter, for medicines, baskets that we make, and for those plants that are used for religious purposes. And so when I do my ethnobotany work, I'm doing that for the people here on the reservation.
Okay, with, like I said earlier, the more and more people are seeking out the natural, I guess, the natural medicines, and most of our medicines are made from plants that grow wild anyway. And as we know that a lot of our people still continue to use these plants for medicine, for food and whatever else, I guess, what kind of impact do you see that the growth in the human population has on the...
Oh, there are many, many impacts on the environment and plants. You covered a lot of territory there with when we look at herbal medicines and pharmaceutical companies, and right now the nutritional supplement industry right now is very big, and everyone in basically all over the world is so interested and intent on doing what they can to improve their own health and well-being. And a majority of botany, well, not botany, but the herbal industry is built on plants that were used by people for thousands of years, and some come from this country and some come from other countries. And so right now there's a big interest by the pharmaceutical companies to investigate plants that tribal people use, excuse me, that people use for medicines or a lot of spiritual purposes. And many times there's research that is targeted out for cancer. Cancer is a very big concern right now. Unfortunately, many times a side implication is that indigenous people's rights to those plants can be lost, or they can be affected so much that sometimes certain tribes have lost their right to use plants that they've been accustomed to using for thousands of years. And so actually, as part of my job, I look at those issues in making sure that what we have here is protected for our tribal people. And there was another part of your question that maybe you could prompt me on. That was kind of a long question.
Well, I guess, other than the impacts, I guess, that we know that are happening today, maybe we'll just go in a different direction. And being an ethnobotanist, what are some of the things that you see or have done to preserve or to protect some of the plants that we have left?
Right now, at this point, one of the most fondest memories I have, or the best thing that I feel that I can do right now, is when I have the opportunity to work with the elders and plants. Because on one hand, for our own people and our culture, finding out every single plant that we ever used is one way, one aspect of protecting our plants. But at the same time, because of confidentiality purposes, because there is an outside threat of research and people attempting to patent it or to exploit the plants out in the wild for other commercial purposes, that we keep a lot of that information very private to the tribes. And I think that working with the elders to make sure that we don't lose any of that information for our people is very important. But at the same time, I also acknowledge of being fortunate to stand in a place where I can tell people that are non-tribal on the outside, wait a minute, there are a lot of rights that the tribal people here have in protecting their culture and continuing their culture. And a lot of that has to do with the plants. I think that our people here, the Salish, the Pend d'Oreille, and the Kootenai, have acknowledged that for thousands and thousands of years, that the plants undoubtedly are a very, very important part of our culture. Because at some point that right now, as modern people, we don't realize there were no drugstores, there were no lumber yards, there were no clothing factories or things, there wasn't a Walmart where you could pick up a set of dishes. You had to make everything from the natural resources. And so on one hand, I find that very dear to my heart to protect the resource and our environment here on the reservation, and actually Aboriginal area.
What are there policies or laws in place that help towards the protection?
One of the things that I've made it my job to do as the ethnobotanist for the tribe is I actually have gone, hopefully, the full route, the full inspection or research of looking at all kinds of laws. I look at international laws, There's a law that's being finalized right now that's called the Convention on Biological Diversity that has many serious implications for indigenous people, and not just in America or Native Americans in America, but for any tribal people on any continent. And the Convention of Biological Diversity is going to have a lot of effect and influence on their ability to continue to use the resources in their lands, whether it's minerals, plants, or the wildlife. And another level below that I look at are, well, I guess I would say those would be global laws. There are some global laws, international laws. And to continue about the Convention of Biological Diversity, there's a section that concerns me, is an Article 8J, and it's the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples. And that is spelling out exactly how the Convention of Biological Diversity intends to work with indigenous peoples on their natural resources. And that one is of very big concern for me, because I don't know how many local people are involved in the process of determining how their rights are going to be protected. And to go down another level, there's another law that is international in scope also, and it's called CITES. It's the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, and that one covers not only endangered species such as plants, but it also involves looking at the trade and the black market in endangered animals, endangered fish, trying to think of endangered, any living thing that has a market that can go across a boundary, and that's what they call CITES. And then to move down from there in the United States, or with the United States itself, we have federal laws that we look at, that I examine, and make sure that we have the ability to use, like, let's say, the Endangered Species Act for the benefit of protecting our resources on the reservation from some kind of development or interest that may impact our ability to continue to use those resources. And there are many, many other laws in the federal government that have implications for plants. That is only the main one right now that I can think of offhand, but there are like agricultural laws, there are plant protection, there's plant seed protection laws, quarantine regulations, that type of thing that I look at. And then we go down into the state, and the state has a large number also of state laws and regulations that have the potential to impact tribal interests in their plants and their natural resources. And I think there's one that I can think of right offhand right now that is very, very pertinent to the reservation, and it's a moratorium on the harvesting of wild medicinal plants in the state of Montana. And right now we're still evaluating the effect that law will have on tribal people, and not only of the Salish, the Kootenai, and the Pend Oreille, but also all of the people, the native people in Montana. And then when you go from there to the tribe as an entity, we have tribal laws and we have tribal ordinances, policies and regulations and resolutions. And so that takes a certain amount of research to see which resolution or which ordinance may be responsible or have the authority of a certain aspect of any activity that impacts plant resources.
Okay, I'll come back here in just a minute, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and take a short break here.
The choices we make today affect our options for tomorrow. I choose not to smoke and pursued my ability to sing. I've been able to travel, make new friends, and see different cultures. Choose carefully. Don't limit your future.
welcome back. Again, the place names for today is N'Chemkane or N'Chemkanet, which means the vision of teepee poles above the water. And that was the sight that people seen as you come over Polson Hill. You never seen all of the teepee, you just seen the teepee poles with the background. You're seeing the lake itself, so N'Chemkanet. The other word is S'chilhuehueh, and this oh no, I guess it's S'chilhuehueh, which means Little Point, and it's just north of Polson, one of the points out there. Again, we're talking to Joanne Big Crane, ethnobotanist for the Preservation Office for the tribes. We broke asking some questions. Joanne, I want to start out by, we mentioned and discussed a lot of different laws and policies. In your thoughts, do you feel that a lot of people know about these policies and these laws?
No, actually, I don't think that everyone, or in a general sense, that a lot of people are aware of all of the laws that impact plants in one way or another or protect them. Like, let's say here on the reservation, we have had a few incidents of what some people consider to be plant poaching, and that is what these people are doing. If they're non-tribal people, is that they're trespassing on tribal land to get or harvest or collect a wild plant that, in their mind, to their way of thinking, is just tribal land, and that they can go out and harvest it for whatever purpose. And right now we do have an ordinance that, actually two ordinances that determine the legalities of that, and not a lot of people are aware of it. And right now we're looking at it much more closely, we're evaluating it much more closely, because this harvesting is impacting many plants on the reservation. In some areas, the plants are being depleted, and so as a tribal people, we're very concerned about it for the environment, and also if those plants have medicinal values. And our strongest goal of the preservation ordinance is to protect those resources for the tribal people. And that is guaranteed to us as a people through many different avenues. And so many people aren't aware of that, that they don't have the freedom to trespass on tribal land to get those particular plants.
What way do you feel you have any plans in how more and more people can be made aware of these laws?
We're looking at, right now we're still under evaluation of some particular ordinances that delegate certain responsibilities to different people in the tribal organization. And once we get that finalized, there will probably be a lot more public outreach, information and trainings and presentations. I myself have given presentations to many different groups, some who are very interested in plants as a hobby, some of them who are professionals who work in that field and are also not aware of tribal laws or policies, or even the philosophy of what tribal people believe. And I've been fortunate here to work with the elders and gather from the Salish, Pondere, and Kootenai elders their feelings, their very deep-seated, very traditional values about plants and the protection of those plants. And so those are the concepts, the aspects that we're writing in to this evaluation, to make it very clear that it isn't just an arbitrary law to keep certain people out of tribal lands or to keep certain people from using these things, but to protect our rights.
Okay, we know the damage that has been created by by commercial people that gather medicinal plants and food plants for commercial purposes. What kind of impact have you seen happen on the reservation or in Aboriginal territory by development?
There's been a lot of impact. When we go back and look in our history, from the moment that we had outsiders come into our Aboriginal area, we have been under impact. And what happens is that several things. We have a reduced area that we can draw on for our foods and our medicines. When we have more people moving into the area, even prior to the reservation, there were already conflicts between people in using the land resources. When we started dealing with the non-tribal people coming into our area, we had a conflict of land use philosophies. Maybe you would call it a worldview difference, because for the people who were coming from back east, they had more of a land possession philosophy, largely built on economies, industry, that type of thing. And so to them, to mark off a piece of land and possess it, to own it, was very important to them, and our whole state was determined under that guidance, was to parcel it up. And in that process of parceling it up, the tribes were further and further reduced in their ability to go out and hunt and gather berries and roots in the areas that they had spent thousands and thousands of years developing a relationship with the plants in certain areas. They had names for those places. There are, if you look at some very old maps, there are many places that are called Camas Meadows or Camas Creek or Bitterroot Meadows, or there are just many places with plant-related names to those. And a lot of those names are very old, that came from the Indians that used those in those areas. And so we have a long-term history. But the more people that came in through the last 200 years or so, we have constantly been under the effects of further losing the land resource, until we have now fairly pretty much been restricted to the reservation area. And a lot of that came about when you read the history and you listen to the oral history of the elders, a lot of frightening things that happened to our own tribal people. And death was one of the ultimate things that happened to many people when they tried to go out and practice their traditional ways in places they were accustomed to for generations. And some people were killed. There was a woman who was killed going to a place that she was accustomed to dig camas, blue camas, and she was killed because a man came in and claimed it as a homestead and did not want these people on his property. And so those kinds of things started influencing our people, and there's many other moments in history where it became frightening for them to go out and practice these old ways. And so when you start moving a big body of people into a smaller area, it created other problems for the tribe from there. There was less bitterroot to use, less harvest berries to pick. It just became much harder because so many more people were focused in that small area. And then with the reservation, I think people know the history with the reservation of how it was broken down into allotments. Pieces of land were sold as homesteads or taken up as homesteads, and that further compacted people into these areas. And so that is one of the reasons why the feeling about plants and the concern about them is so great.
We're about out of time, Joanne. Quickly, we've been impacted. The plants have been impacted by commercial harvesting, by development. What about the introduction of different plants and species, what kind of effect does that have?
It has some effect. We're in the process of changing that concept or that technology here on the reservation. For a long time, we've had all kinds of different projects, roadside revegetation, other kinds of land alteration, revegetation projects, farming, agricultural practices, and they have brought in a lot of plants that aren't native to this area. And right now, well, actually for a period of years, we've had some restoration work happening for a variety of different things, one of being stream restoration or other kinds of land restoration. And we have been able, as the tribal natural resource people, technicians, staff, have been able to start turning that around into bringing our vision of reinstating or reestablishing our own indigenous plants. And those are the plants that were originally here. Some of the roadside revegetation projects bring in grass seed or forbs, which are like flowers, regular flowers, and other non-flowering plants, have brought them in and they come from somewhere else. And in some situations, they create anywhere from a slight problem to a great massive problem like knapweed. Mm-hmm. They will create a whole nother condition out there that sometimes is not acceptable for the quality of the environment.
Okay, well, we're out of time, I think, Joanne, and I thank you for you being here. And thank everyone out there for joining us again. There's a lot of information here. We try to cram as much as we can. But culturally, it's very, very important to us Indian people. It's part of our religious ceremonies. Plants are part of our history. It's part of our survival as Indian people. So with that, I would say,